What if the knights you admire were not all the noble figures you think they were? For centuries, we have been captivated by the legends of the medieval knights. They are often depicted as brave and chivalrous warriors, saving damsels in distress, conquering enemies with valor, and swearing oaths of loyalty. But were these knights truly the heroic figures of legend? Or is there much more to their story, filled with darker motives and complex realities? Let's take a deeper look at the life of medieval knights, exploring their origins, their training, and the harsh realities they faced. The origins of knighthood, born from the feudal system. The knights we know today didn't emerge in a vacuum. They were products of the feudal system, a complex socio-political structure that dominated Europe during the Middle Ages. The system was built on the relationship between lords, vassals, and serfs. The lords owned vast tracts of land, which they divided up among their vassals. In exchange for land, these vassals promised military service, becoming the warrior class of the medieval world. Over time, these warriors evolved into knights. Knighthood was not just a title. It was a way of life, embedded in the feudal obligations of loyalty and service. A knight was expected to fight on behalf of his lord, defend his land, and uphold the social order. But the reality of knighthood, particularly in the early days, was far more about survival and loyalty to the lord than about heroism or noble deeds. It was a job, a difficult and often dangerous one. The path to knighthood, a grueling journey. Becoming a knight was not a simple task. It was a journey that started early in a boy's life, often before the age of 10. These boys were trained in the art of warfare, learning everything from horsemanship to swordsmanship. But their training was more than just physical. They were also taught the principles of honor, chivalry, and loyalty to their lord. At the age of 7 or 8, a boy would typically enter a lord's household as a page. As a page, he learned the basics of service, how to attend to his lord, how to ride a horse, and how to behave in court. The life of a page was primarily about learning discipline and gaining the experience necessary for the next step. At around 14, the page would become a squire. This marked the beginning of his formal training as a warrior. The squire's role was to assist a knight, learning firsthand what it meant to fight in battle and defend his lord's interests. The squire would care for the knight's armor, hold his horse, and sometimes accompany him into battle. This stage could last for several years, and many squires were expected to participate in battles, gaining crucial experience in the field. By the age of 21, a squire could be formally knighted, receiving the title of knight in a grand ceremony that included an oath of loyalty, prayers for divine protection, and a ritualistic dubbing with a sword. This was a momentous occasion in a young man's life, one that signified the end of his training and his entry into the warrior class. The realities of battle, brutal and chaotic. Despite the romanticized images of knights charging into battle with their shining armor and gleaming swords, the reality of medieval warfare was far more chaotic and brutal. Knights fought in battles that were often disorganized and chaotic. While knights were trained in swordsmanship, archery, and horsemanship, their most important role in battle was to lead the charge, often in heavily armored combat. But there were many challenges associated with fighting in full armor. Heavy plate armor, designed to protect a knight from sword strikes, was cumbersome and hot. A knight could weigh as much as 50 pounds, 22 kilos in full armor, making it difficult to move quickly. In some battles, knights found themselves unable to keep up with the rest of their forces, falling behind and becoming vulnerable to enemy attacks. The idea of knights being invincible warriors is a myth. In many cases, the survival of knights depended on the strength of their armor and the tactics employed by their commanders. Moreover, while knights were often celebrated for their courage, many of them fought not out of a sense of honor, but because it was a requirement of their feudal obligations. Many knights fought to secure their own power, or to win wealth, land, and prestige. It was a brutal and unforgiving world, and survival often depended more on one's ability to exploit situations than on valor. The religious orders, valor or greed. While the image of the solitary knight fighting for honor dominates popular imagination, there were also religious orders of knights, such as the Templars, whose missions were intertwined with both faith and military conquest. The Knights Templar were founded during the Crusades to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem. They quickly became one of the most powerful and wealthy military orders in Europe, owning vast amounts of land and amassing considerable wealth. Although the Templars initially had noble goals, their rise to power also led to corruption. Many Templars participated in brutal military campaigns, acquiring land and treasure from the regions they conquered. Their transformation from pious warriors to power-hungry aristocrats highlights the darker side of medieval knighthood. The Templars were eventually disbanded by King Philip IV of France in the early 14th century, partly due to their immense wealth and influence. Their fall from grace marked the end of an era for religious military orders. but their story also underscores the complex relationship between religious fervor and political ambition during the medieval period. Chivalry and its flaws, the myth of the noble knight. The concept of chivalry, the code of conduct knights were supposed to follow, was a crucial part of medieval knighthood. Chivalry included ideals such as courage, honor, respect for women, and protection of the weak. Knights were expected to protect the innocent, uphold justice, and live by a strict moral code. However, the reality of chivalry often fell short of these ideals. While some knights indeed embodied these values, many others exploited their position for personal gain. For instance, many knights engaged in raids and land grabs, fighting not for the defense of the realm, but for power and wealth. The idea that all knights were gallant and noble is a myth created by romanticized literature, including the tales of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Knights also had their share of failings. They were often ruthless in battle, engaging in war for territorial expansion, and engaging in bloody campaigns that left devastation in their wake. The chivalric code may have been noble in theory, but in practice, it was often disregarded when it conflicted with a knight's ambitions. Knights in modern memory, heroes or myths. So, were the knights of the Middle Ages true heroes, or were they simply figures constructed by myth and legend? The answer is complex. While knights were undeniably skilled warriors, and some did exemplify the ideals of courage and loyalty, the historical reality was much messier. They were products of a feudal society that demanded loyalty and service, but many were motivated by personal ambition, power, and wealth. They were not always the noble heroes we read about in stories, but rather individuals trying to survive in a brutal and unstable world. Knighthood, at its core, was not about heroism, but about survival, duty, and the pursuit of power. The knights we admire today were part of a society where loyalty to one's lord was paramount, but where personal gain often trumped ideals of honor. Their stories are far more complicated than the myths we have been taught. To understand the true nature of knighthood, we must look beyond the legends and consider the social and political realities of the time. Knights were not simply heroes. They were warriors, vassals, and sometimes villains, caught in a world of violence, power struggles, and shifting allegiances. The legacy of medieval knights is a mixture of myth and reality. While they have been immortalized as chivalrous heroes, the truth is far more nuanced. The knights were integral to the feudal system, their lives shaped by loyalty, service, and power struggles. Their training was rigorous, and their battles often brutal and unforgiving. But they were not immune to corruption, greed, or the darker aspects of human nature. If we wish to understand the true nature of the medieval knights, we must be willing to question the myths and acknowledge the complexities of their lives. Were they heroes? Some were. But for many, the reality of knighthood was about survival, not about glory. As we look back on the knights of the Middle Ages, let us remember both the valor and the flaws that shaped them. To uncover more historical truths and question the assumptions of the past, subscribe now to History Lineage. Together we'll continue exploring the hidden stories of the past and uncover the complexities that history often leaves out.